Greetings, superintendents, school administrators, parents, professors, teachers, former students, elected representatives, members of our community. We come here today because school funding has become a moral issue in our beautiful state of Connecticut. We come here today because in many of our suburban towns, rural areas, and urban communities, there's simply nothing left in our school budgets to cut. We come here today because our profession has become marginalized over the last several years with the standardized testing and the myopic focus on test scores. And the children of whom we teach have become often dehumanized. We come here today because it's time to change the way we fund our schools. Good morning. I'm Jacob Werblow, Assistant Professor of Teacher Education here at Central Connecticut State University. I'd like to welcome you and our viewers at home to come to this issue on school funding. So this issue started with a conversation at a lunch counter over the summer. Sasha Davis, a community organizer from Parent Power, Aram Ayalon, a professor here, and someone who has been a guiding light for me since my tenure began 4 years ago. And we sat down and talked about issues that really mattered. And the timing felt right. It seemed like there was really no other choice than to address this issue of school funding. So we got on the phone. Aram had called Dianne DeVries, who we had met before, who, as many of you know, has been working diligently on this issue for the last 13 years. And if we didn't have Dianne, none of us would probably be here today. So her work has really, and the work from CCJEF have really given us hope and possibility to actually see what we would like to come forward, to come to be. So the purpose of today's event is to bring together all of you and the viewers at home to really learn about this issue and to advocate for a more equitable school funding formula. So today we're going to have Dianne DeVries give a keynote address. Shortly afterwards, we're going to hear from the voices of the children. We have a bilingual performance with 8th graders from DiLoretto Dual Language Magnet School and a group of my students from Teacher Education, EDTE 316. We'll be doing a performance where rap, poetry, dance will highlight some of these themes that young people are facing because of the inadequate funding that they're often given. Now let me first say foremost that DiLoretto is an amazing school. It's one of the few dual language schools in our state. But when you dig deeper, you find that there's often either ors. We've gained a dual language program, but we have to cut all sports teams. There's no art budget. When you go to the copy machine, there's no paper because all the teachers have to hold the paper in their own rooms. So just yesterday I was there in the copy machine, opened drawer number 1, it's blank. Drawer number 2, it's blank. They didn't even have a drawer number 3. So I'd like to last thank our financial supporters, which is the CCSU Office of Diversity and Equity, the Dean's Office from the School of Education and Professional Studies, and also our supporting members, which include the CCSU Education Club, Department of Special Education, the Department of Teacher Education, and of course the School of Education and Professional Studies, and also the Center for Africana Studies. We welcome CTN. We're very thankful that they're here as well, recording this important event. And I'd just like to remind you all that on outside of the theater, there's research, there's information, there's packets, there's sign-ups for you if you want to stay involved with this issue. Today, we're not going to change the way the schools are funded, but today is an important step in the right direction. The lead organizers who've put this event together, we've already begun organizing the next event. Those of you that are involved in schools, let me ask you, how many times have we taken our children on field trips to Six Flags or, right, another amusement park. Well, how many times have we brought them to our state capitol to ask our representatives for what they know they deserve? So we'll keep you informed. So at this time, we're very honored to have the president of our university, President Jack Miller, to come up and give a short welcome.
Thank you, Jacob. And good morning and welcome to all of you. As Jacob said, my name is Jack Miller. I'm the president here at Central Connecticut State University. And I'm very pleased and proud that we are hosting such an event. As an educator that's taught third graders and high school students and bachelor's degree and master's degree and doctoral degree students across the years, I always like to be together with people that are concerned with the agenda of improving the education in our schools and in particular in our public schools. I want to thank the individuals on the planning committee, certainly Jacob Werblow, who you've already met, Aram Alan, who I see in the back, Sasha Davis, Diane Kaplan, who is the project director, and the others that worked, in addition to the steering committee, the others that worked to make this happen. I also want to thank the superintendents that are here that are going to participate later in a panel. Ron Jakubowski, our own local school superintendent from New Britain Schools, Abby Dolliver from Norwich, and John Ramos from Bridgeport Schools, as well as Dianne Orson, the senior editor for WMPR, who will moderate that panel. We're here to focus on what it will take to provide students with a quality education. That is, all students. And frankly, it's a question that I often end up asking myself as the person responsible for the 12,000 to 13,000 students that we have every semester here at Central and the 1,000+ faculty members that work here. And one of the things that we know about the likelihood of success of those students is that if they come here and do not have to go into remedial studies, the likelihood of their graduation is exponentially higher. So those students that come college ready, who don't have to go back and take the remediation courses in English and writing and math, are far more likely to stay and graduate than those who begin sort of behind the curve, so to speak. Not that they can't succeed and not that some of them don't, but the likelihood is clearly less. And so we all have a vested interest in this. And I thought, just from a personal standpoint, I might share an observation that I think, to me, really tends to put the focus on the issues that we're talking about. And I bring this to you not because it's necessarily new data. It may be new to some of you. It may be data that others of you have seen. But it has to do with the quality of our education and the direction in which we're headed in this country compared to the direction of the rest of the world with whom we are competing for jobs and economic development. And here's the simple example. We've all read about the President Obama's college completion agenda and the work to get, and that we went in 1985, the United States, young adults, that is the 25 to 35-year-old age group in the census, that age group in 1985 in the United States had the highest percentage of people who had a 2-year college degree or more of any country in the world. Today, we're 13th of the other countries in the world. And let me give you an example as to why. We're about the only country in the world where you can take every 10-year age segment, 25 to 35, 35 to 45, 45 to 55, 55 to 65, And the percentage of people who have a college degree is the same in every one. The percentage of people in this country between the age of 55 and 65 with a college degree is the same 40-something% as the people from 25 to 35. Now, I'll give you one country to compare it to, South Korea. South Korea, in the age group from 55 to 65, less than 10% of the people have a degree. In the age group from 25 to 35, 63% compared to our 43. So if you want to know what's going on and why, as Jacob said, this is a moral issue, it's way more than a moral issue. It is a survival, a financial survival, economic issue as well. And we can no longer get by providing a quality education for half of the people and omitting the other half, because that's not what the rest of the world is doing. And we all know that the jobs that there were in 1970 are not there anymore. You can't make a good living anymore with dropping out of high school and banging the tires onto Ford trucks. There aren't any jobs left anymore, or they're somewhere else, or they're downsized. So I simply say that by way of context setting and say that this is crucial to all of us. It's crucial to those of us in higher education who work with the products of your schools and try to help move them on up the continuum. But if we're going to get back to anything like even footing, if we are going to get back to be Canada, who's now number 2 or 3, depending on which you look at, well, we're 12 or 13. If we're going to get back to that, it's going to take some major changes in the way we educate the entire population, not part of it. So I'm pleased that you're all here and focused on this issue. It's incredibly important to all of us, and I thank Jacob for his work, plus all the people that have worked on putting this together. Thank you.
At this time, we'd like to bring up Marilyn Calderon, who is the Interim Executive Director of Connecticut Parent Power, to say a few words and to introduce Dianne DeVries.
Good morning and welcome, students, parents, and distinguished guests. My name is Marilyn Calderon, and I am the Interim Executive Director for Connecticut Parent Power, and I am honored to stand before you representing one of the only parent-led organizations in the state of Connecticut. Connecticut Parent Power helps engage parents at different stages to help them discuss different topics of healthcare, schools, and also early childhood and equity to ensure that all children have access to a better education. We want to ensure that we're able to empower parents to continue being their most influential teacher of their children so they can engage in conversations with our community to ensure that no child is left behind. Our organization teaches parents to have an active voice, to take active parts in our school systems to ensure that we're preventative in nature. And we're hoping that by having talks like this, we're able to get more families involved in this process, to have a shared vision for Connecticut to ensure that all voices are heard. Buenos días y bienvenidos a todos. Soy la señora Marilyn Calderon y soy la directora provisional del Poder de Padres. Es con orgullo que yo me paro aquí representando nuestro público, siendo la única organización para poder promover los temas que promueven para los padres en tópicos que tienen que ver con salud, educación para niños de temprana edad y también para promover una visión que podemos cambiar el sistema educacional juntos con una voz que se puede escuchar. Es muy importante poder promover este movimiento para que los padres entiendan que nosotros somos más fuertes con una voz juntas. Estamos aquí para ayudar al Estado con este sitio que puede ser un sitio muy hermoso para nuestros niños, para que todos tengan una educación de calidad, hoy y siempre. It is with great pleasure and honor that I have the opportunity to represent one of our champions of this event, as Jacob mentioned earlier. Dr. Dianne DeVries is an education consultant who also serves as a project director for the Connecticut Coalition for Justice in Education Funding, CCJEF. She is responsible for supporting the coalition's efforts through research, policy development, and outreach, a consultant who specializes in education of the disadvantaged and school finance-related issues. Dianne earned her master's degree in multicultural education and a doctorate in education policy, research, and administration from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Her extensive career in action research and technical assistance includes a variety of federal policies and initiatives, including Blue Ribbon Schools, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, ESEA Title I, adult education, preschool, before and after school programs, and migrant education, as well as policy research and cost-effectiveness studies. Dianne has been a working person since she began her journey in school finance reform issues in Connecticut since the early 1998, when she served as education adequacy consultant to the Johnson & Rowland legal team. When the school finance case was withdrawn in the late 2003 for lack of funding, she proceeded to build a much larger statewide coalition, the Connecticut Coalition for Justice in Education Funding. Since early this fall, she has been instrumental in contributing to the columnist for the Connecticut News Junkie with weekly op-eds or issues relating to school finance. She is here today to talk to all of you about the struggle for adequate and equitable funding for our public schools and the vital role as an effective school finance system plays in ensuring equal educational opportunities and closing of our state's achievement gap. Please give Dianne DeVries a warm welcome applause.
So what will it take to provide students a quality education? First and foremost, it's going to take an adequate and equitable school funding system. Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased and honored to be here to talk with you this morning as we ponder together how it is we're going to ensure that every Connecticut child leaves high school ready for success in college or other advanced training, the work world, which is now global, the military, or even a spot on the Rockettes here in New Britain, or whatever. And that every graduate is also well prepared to become a responsible citizen who is motivated and well equipped to actively contribute to the life of our communities and the democratic processes and institutions that make up this state and nation. It's especially fitting that we're here together today in that tomorrow is Human Rights Day, both in the United States and across the world. Access to a quality education is most assuredly a civil right that we in Connecticut normally have taken for granted. But we need to be vigilant about enforcing that right so that every child in every Connecticut community can enjoy it. I'd like to begin with the key takeaways from what I'm going to be talking about this morning. Due to time limitations and to save you all from excessive information overload, my remarks are going to be focused on the state's primary mechanism for providing aid to the public schools, namely the Education Cost Sharing Grant, or the ECS as we call it. And I'm going to keep it relatively light, an introductory level, because it's important that somehow we all can penetrate this needlessly complex formula and its role in supporting our public schools. Also, I'd like you please to save your questions for the end. I hope to finish in time that we can either have a few questions now, or I'll entertain questions later when the panel meets after the student performance. So why am I focusing on the ECS? Because the ECS grant accounts for 80% of the state education aid that's provided to Connecticut's 169 towns, and the roughly 92% of all public school students who attend these traditional and regional public schools. It's probably important also to remind you that the ECS arose out of the Connecticut Supreme Court's 1977 decision in Horton versus Meskel, wherein the court determined that there is a fundamental right to equal enjoyment of education, and that a system of financing education that relied on local property taxes without regard to disparities in town wealth, and which lacked significant equalizing support from the state, was unconstitutional. Notwithstanding that seminal court decision, today there are 45 communities that receive less ECS aid per pupil than they did under the $250 flat grant prior to the Horton decision. And two of these communities, believe it or not, are Stamford and Norwich, which both serve large proportions of disadvantaged children and are among the state's 15 priority school districts, as are the 3 school districts who will be talking with you later this morning. I'm also going to be summarizing the legal action brought by the Connecticut Coalition for Justice in Education Funding on behalf of parents and school children to assert their rights in obtaining a free and suitable quality education under the Connecticut Constitution. And because every one of you here today has a vested interest in the outcome of this landmark education lawsuit, I know you'll want to hear just where that case now stands. Finally, it's important that you not leave this beautiful theater today without a sense of great urgency. How many more school children can we afford to lose to the streets, to unemployability, to failure at college or work because of inadequate skills, or even to prisons because they fell through the cracks of our overly distressed, under-resourced public schools? Just how many more children can we afford, fiscally and morally, to leave behind? So, how do we fund our public schools? Taxes, of course. This pie chart shows that for the current fiscal year, this is 11-12, federal revenues are expected to account for a little over 5% of district school spending. State government supplies about 41%. And the cities and towns will continue to carry the lion's share of the school funding burden at 53.5%. Despite years of so-called good intentions, the state has never once funded its promised 50-50 share. And while state aid draws on many kinds of taxes, including the state's income tax, the local share must come from property taxes. Property taxes, as you know, are highly regressive. They affect you whether you have an income or not, whether you're a senior citizen, a handicapped person, or a young, struggling family. As in the pre-Horton years, Connecticut still has a wide-ranging rate of property taxes, with the poorest communities taxing their residents at the very highest rates. Despite the rising cost of education, state aid has not kept pace. As education costs have continued to rise and state ECS dollars have mostly remained flat, municipalities have had to sacrifice other needed services just to make up for the state's inadequate school aid. So, we're going to spend a couple of minutes here going through how the formula works. Again, from a very non-technical level, the CCSU people really wanted this to happen. I was skeptical, but let me bore you for a few minutes, please. It all begins with the number of students the town is fiscally responsible for. That's what we call the resident student count. This includes, by the way, special ed students who are sent to schools, specialized schools elsewhere in the state. It does not include charter school students. It does include students going to interdistrict magnet schools. You take that resident student count, and then you count the poverty kids. And the poverty kids, unfortunately, are just those who are covered under the federal Title I grant, which in many communities, the most highly distressed communities, by the way, that serve the lion's share of poor children, that count is less than 1/4 of children who are really from poor families. So it's artificially low, saves the state money. Unfortunately, it does a lot of damage to school children. And that number then is weighted as a third of a child. So each child who is determined to be poor under Title I gets a third weighting, over and above the one over here for being a member of the town. Then we're going to do the same thing with limited English proficient students. Now, the state offers a small grant for those children who qualify for English as a second language. And again, there are lots of regulations that go with this, lots of parameters of who can and cannot receive, and the very short turnaround time those children can be in the language programs. I believe the last I looked at was 30 months. Just an unheard of challenge for a student coming here with no English and no parents at home to support that child's learning of English. And usually the entire community is non-English speaking as well. Anyway, the students who are not entitled to bilingual services are then what we call limited English proficient, and so we count those, and we count them at 0.15, 15% of a regular child. Then we subtract 1/4 of all the kids going out to the interdistrict magnet schools. Now that wouldn't be a bad bargain. The district would get to keep 3/4 of the ECS money and yet not have to educate those children. But it usually doesn't work that way because usually the school district also has to pay tuition for those children. So it's a real double whammy. And then you take that sum, multiply it by the foundation level. The foundation level currently is $9,687 per child. That foundation level was initially designed back in the 1980 when all this began to represent what it would really cost to educate a child with no special learning needs. In other words, a child who speaks English and has no handicaps and isn't particularly from a very, very poor family. Well, in today's terms, we would call that was what they considered to be the adequate amount, the adequate level. This is before the concept of adequacy really gained much ground. And then you multiply that by the town's aid base and its aid ratio. We won't even go into that. That is incredibly complex. And I'll tell you in a minute where you can find more information. All of that then gives you the grand total of the fully funded ECS grant entitlement. But wait, there's a catch-22. You don't get it all. They're still phasing it in, but the phase-in is, of course, frozen given the economy. So anyway, we have some, and one other point, it's phased in, but it's not phased in equally in all towns. So some towns are close to their maximum. In fact, I think New Britain is all but 10 million to being fully funded according to this formula. And other towns are only like around 50% towards that final goal. Now, I'm also going to show you, or tell you, I should say, just how far off the bat that fully funded amount really is. Back in 2005, just as the CCJEF was getting started, we commissioned an education adequacy cost study. This is the only known social science method for determining what it really costs to do the job in our public schools. We commissioned a firm that is nationally prominent in doing this, And they did their study. The study was 2 different kinds. In fact, you can go to the CCJEF website, which you'll see in a few minutes, and there is a 4-page overview of that study that recently was posted to the website. According to that study, Bridgeport should last year, because I had to use last year's figures, that's the latest the state has released so far. As of last year, Bridgeport should have been spending $19,443 per child. This is just operating expenses. It doesn't include transportation. Instead, it was spending $13,125. In other words, they had an annual allocation shortfall of $132.8 million. Boy, would that have made a big difference in Bridgeport. Now let's talk about New Britain. It's even worse. New Britain should have been spending last year $20,708 per child. Instead, it was spending $12,132. Almost an $8,000 difference per child. A tremendous difference in the quality of education that can be offered those children. In other words, the budget was $93,251,000 short of what it should have been. And that shortfall would not have come out of New Britain's taxpayers, who are already paying a disproportionate heavy burden. It should have come out of the state coffers. Norwich, same story. There, the shortfall is about $3,500 per child, and the annual allocation was short about $20 million. Again, for a small district like Norwich, that would have been a tremendous godsend. And you'll hear from the superintendent the drastic accommodations to a flat funding year after year that she has had to do. So, in doing an analysis, district by district, of what the study said back in 2005 and what the amount should have been last year, and in putting in the inflation ratios and so on, it turns out that 87% of all children served by our public schools, our traditional public schools, are still today inadequately funded. This is a big, big issue. So, now that I've gotten you into the mood, let's really get at it. What's wrong with the ECS? Well, where does one begin? I just summarized some of the biggies, and I actually want to refer you, and I will try not to be tooting my own horn here, but I encourage you to look up on Connecticut News Junkie and search out my column on October 17, which basically overviews many of these factors in much more depth than I can do here today, and in the coming weeks there'll be even more of this. Each of these is a major issue. First of all, the education funding pie itself is too small. If we had the best formula in the nation, it still wouldn't work. It still would be inadequate for doing what we need to be doing in our classrooms, unless the pie itself was sufficient. The formula as it currently stands is not based on what it costs to educate students at all. It's certainly not to educate them well, that's for sure. It's not based on what it costs to meet the state and federal standards. Very big point. Nor on what best practices research says is effective for doing that. It undercounts at-risk students with extra learning needs. I just told you about the Title I count. Well, it gets worse than that, because it's really the Title I count 4 or 5 years ago, not even today. It essentially ignores the special education costs altogether. A few years back, they pretended to roll that in, but it was only a few dollars, and nobody even thinks about that seriously anymore. It's such a trivial amount compared to what it really is costing school districts to educate special education students. And remember, special education students enjoy mandated, federally and state mandated services. And they should. They deserve those services. They need those services. But what this does is create more and more pressure on the regular program, because that's the only other place you can get the money from. So as a result, the quality of education throughout the district declines. Remember, even the special education students get the regular program. What they're getting is over and above that. The formula was never fully funded and has constantly been tinkered with, almost annually. At some point, someone did an analysis of just how many times it was. I think it was around two dozen times where there were relatively significant changes. The distribution of aid is flawed and inequitable. Again, I could spend 2 hours telling you all of that, but believe me, there is no town, no school district getting its fair share, and that includes the big urbans who indeed do get the lion's share of the ECS. It's just not enough to make a difference in what they need to do. And the smaller towns, including those 45 relatively high wealth communities that are today getting less than they got before the Horton versus Meskel lawsuit. Tied to the ECS, the minimum budget requirement, the dreaded MBR. This is the amount municipalities are required by statute to contribute towards their local schools. And this really is only a sore spot with those towns that themselves are fiscally distressed, like a New Britain, like a Bridgeport, like a whole bunch of other towns this year. They are required to put in a certain amount. And even if the school district's enrollment has declined, or even if the town and the school district are sharing services and therefore cutting costs, never mind, they still have to keep putting in that same amount. There are great arguments on the side of the communities, and there are certainly equally great arguments on the side of school districts. Mostly that until that formula is fixed and we are adequately funded for education, please don't take away that MBR. Don't tinker with it, because it's the only thing that keeps our doors open. And the municipalities understand that. There's also the problem of the formula itself having been capped for 13 years. That in itself, again, is a story that could consume a whole lot of time. But let me just tell you, the biggest cap loss district, the one that lost by far and away the most, was Bridgeport. Why would that district, the poorest in the state, be the biggest cap loss district? It lost over $108.3 million over those 13 years. Just insane. New Britain itself lost $81.5 million over those years. Norwich lost $3.6 million. There's a whole list of them. Whole list, lots and lots of districts that have lost. Now, I just want to also tell you that you can go to the State Department of Education's grant management pages online and call up the ECS worksheet. It'll be dated for FY09, simply because things got frozen then. As you know, we did have this little recession problem, but also because many things on the website do not get updated terribly regularly. Anyway, this is the worksheet for Bridgeport, as I believe. Yes, for Bridgeport. It's one page. Every single step of the allocation is spelled out here. So that will give you lots of detail. You can look up your own community and then compare the results community by community. You will also see how incredibly old some of this data that are used are. Very old, and as we've heard recently from CCM and Connecticut Voices for Children and other groups, much of these data are invalid. Many, many flaws in the data that are being used that need to be re-examined. So, another question I often get asked is, how do we know that the state's finance system is broken and that not all students are receiving equal educational opportunity? What makes you say that, they say? Well, there's the little issue of state and federal standards. This is a standards-based era. Also, we have the Education Adequacy Cost Study that very clearly spells that out. There are also stark disparities of inputs. Inputs like numbers of teachers, class sizes, numbers of books, the age of textbooks, the numbers of janitors, the numbers of social workers and their caseloads. All these kinds of things are inputs. And they're resources. They're not necessarily dollars. They're resources and how far one can stretch those resources, particularly given the varying depth of need that we see in some of these student populations. So we have these disparities of inputs, but even more, we have the disparities of student outcomes, including, of course, the unconscionable and incontrovertible, there's no denying that, achievement gaps that we have here in Connecticut. This is stark evidence that something is wrong with the school aid formula. Now, does that mean that not something is wrong with how we're delivering education and so on? No. It doesn't preclude all that, but what we're saying is it all starts with the buck. You know, in your own households and your own businesses, everything starts with the dollars to make all those things happen that you believe in and you know have to happen in your daily life, in your daily business. Oh, there's also observable evidence, documented patterns of unmet needs, student, parent, and community, and of course, school staff testimony. So what is it that Connecticut educators and parents and community leaders and businesses are saying what kind of resources are now needed that are not already in our schools? And I hope that you will take a few minutes to look at the wonderful student posters out there in the corridor, because indeed, many of those posters actually focus on this same question. First and foremost, in almost every community that we visit, universal preschool and full-day kindergarten, smaller class sizes, a longer school day and a longer school year. Certainly, at minimum, free summer school for all, and not just those who need remediation, but also those who want to excel and get more enrichment programming. Help for students falling behind, up-to-date textbooks, materials, computer technology, opportunities for advanced students, including college prep classes, expanded arts programming, more foreign language options, professional development for teachers, improved buildings and grounds, the maintenance efforts, and so on. All these things, by the way, are not just in the high poverty urban districts we're talking about. Go to the high wealth communities, you get the same list, and almost to the T in the same priority. Whoops, something happened here. Let's see if I can get this off. Yeah. So that's one of the ahas about doing checklists of needs and having community conversations, is that you soon find we're more alike than we are different across communities. And despite the two Connecticut myth, which isn't so much a myth, but the two Connecticut's still, when it comes to schooling, have the same very basic needs. And I can't tell you how many times in high wealth communities, superintendents and school board members have said to me, if we don't do something about that ECS formula so that we get what we need to sustain high quality, we're not going to be one of those outstanding performing school districts any longer. They're as much on the brink, to some extent, as the big urbans are. So that gets us to the lawsuit and the efforts of CCJEF to revamp the ECS and comprehensively reform the state's entire school funding system to ensure equal educational opportunity and quality schooling for all children. We want to revamp the school funding system to reflect the real cost of adequately preparing all students for the modern workforce and for productive citizenship. We want to improve the resource equity across districts and schools And we want to shift the lion's share of school funding away from property taxes and onto the state where it constitutionally belongs. Just a quick word for those of you not yet familiar with CCJEF. It's a broad-based coalition that includes municipalities, local school districts, the alphabet soup of professional education associations, nonprofits fighting the ravages of poverty, the teachers' unions, of course, and parents from across the state. The coalition represents about half of all public school students, including 2/3 to 3/4 of all poor and minority students, children from homes where English is not the dominant language, and those who receive special education services. This is really important. Our communities represent the entire gamut of what goes on in Connecticut. Small towns, large towns, wealthy, poor, white, highly minority. We take great pride in representing them all. In November of 2005, after the adequacy study was issued, and we saw no movement coming out of the governor's office or from the legislature in genuinely trying to fix the formula and do what we insist needs to be done, we reluctantly filed a lawsuit. Yale Law School came forward, has represented us in this action throughout, and pro bono. The only thing we pay is for the expert studies and for technical costs that are related to any litigation. But Yale's participation has been a godsend, so that we don't run out of money like the earlier predecessor lawsuit, Johnson versus Rowland. Let me just read you the claims of that lawsuit. The state has failed to adequately and equitably fund its public schools, and as a result, plaintiff school children have been denied a reasonable opportunity to meet the state's own learning standards. School children have suffered irreparable harm from the limitations that school underfunding has placed on their ability to take full advantage of the nation's democratic processes and institutions, secure meaningful employment in the competitive high-skills, high-wage global marketplace, successfully continue their education beyond high school, and reap the monetary and intellectual rewards of the above. And an additional claim, minority students have been disproportionately impacted by these funding behaviors. In 2006, as the case began to move forward finally, the state filed a motion saying, there's no right to a quality education in Connecticut. Never mind that we're the wealthiest state in the nation. All we promise to do is put a building in every town on which the town may put the sign school. But the state has no duty to put teachers in that building or to turn on the electricity. We obviously could not let that stand. We appealed the judge's unfavorable decision wherein he basically said, yeah, I think you're right. I don't see it there in the Constitution, in the education clause from 1965. So we appealed it. And you know what? The author of that 1965 education clause filed an amicus brief on our behalf. He's now in his late 90s and retired, of course. He flew up from Sarasota to sit there in the front seat, in the front row before the Supreme Court justices when we had oral arguments in our appeal, and spoke to the media and said, of course we intended that this clause take care of good schooling. Well, the decision that came out of the court 23 months to the day later was not disappointing. The fundamental right to education is not an empty linguistic shell. What the justice meant by that in the remarks, in the written decision, was in the Horton versus Meskel case, it was first determined by the court that there is a fundamental right to children to a free and suitable education. So to some extent, the argument here was over the word suitable and whether that now meant adequate and quality. And sure enough, it does. They referred in the decision primarily to the New York City campaign for equity lawsuit of a couple years back, saying that indeed children have a right to a minimally adequate physical facilities and so on, minimally adequate instrumentalities of learning, minimally adequate teaching of responsibly up-to-date basic curricula such as reading, writing, math, science, and social studies, and sufficient personnel and adequately trained personnel to teach in those subject areas. But they went on to say that a suitable education is one that prepares school children to participate fully in democratic institutions, such as jury service and voting, to progress to institutions of higher education, attain productive employment, contribute to the state's economy. Gee, didn't we just hear me saying that that's what we were trying to do? And this was the real kicker. The standard is dynamic. What we think today is quality education, I guarantee you 20 years from now is going to look like a dinosaur. The standard is dynamic, dependent upon the demands of an evolving world. Critical, critical statement. And with that decision, parents and school children will forever now have the right to question the quality of education their children are receiving. I can tell you that my friends in other states across this nation who are working on school finance lawsuits or who are just supporting the remedies of those negotiated settlements are envious that we got this kind of decision this early in the game. Most of them have to go through 8, 9, 10 years of preparing for trial, never knowing if the court's going to say, oh, you have no such right. Now we know, we've got that right. So our next step now is simply we have to go to trial, finally, and prove that, hey, that standard is not being met in a whole lot of communities here in Connecticut. So the case was remanded. It's now back in Hartford Superior Court in the complex litigation docket. It's moving forward. We're really heavy duty into the plaintiff's discovery phase. We've been doing lots and lots of field data collection, commissioned expert studies that will be very, very useful, deposing some of the key State Department of Education people, and there are more depositions coming up soon, and then it will be the state's turn to do all that. The state, in the meantime, in early September or mid-September, filed a motion. Some of you here, I think I saw at the LOB on Wednesday. The state filed a motion saying that preschool, early childhood programs should not be a part of this lawsuit. That these kids have no rights because they're not in elementary school. This is, I mean, the Supreme Court, or the Constitutional Convention back in 1965 did not mean to extend those privileges to kids not even in kindergarten yet. Well, there's that little phrase that we just went through. The standard is dynamic, dependent upon demands of an evolving world. I think it will be very difficult to find school finance experts anywhere in this nation, or even non-experts, who would say preschool is unimportant. It is not related to how students perform. It is not an essential element of an adequate education. I believe almost everyone, including the nation's most conservative economists, by the way, definitely believe in that, in what I just said. So we are fighting that. We don't know yet when the briefs will be due and when the oral arguments will be due, but all of you who filled out your forms today for contact information, believe me, when that happens, you'll be notified. There are going to be other pretrial motions coming up, we know that. As it now stands, the trial is tentatively set for January 2014. It's not carved in stone. Every time there's another motion, there's another delay, and so far, since 2005, that has been the state's major strategy: delay, delay, delay. So what happens if nothing happens? This is really important. I wanted to basically share with you, and I wish that President Miller were here to hear some of this, because I'm going to share some of the findings that have come out of one of our expert studies It's been filed with the court, but it's not yet publicly available. We probably will be making it publicly available later in the spring and have the experts who did it come and talk to you all. It was conducted by two professors who head up a research center that studies costs versus benefits in education at Teachers College, Columbia. So you'll notice that more educated persons pay more state and federal taxes and impose lower public expenditures on government for health, criminal justice matters, welfare programs, and so on. Now, I won't read all this, and I can tell you there's pages and pages of this kind of data, but I thought it was important to look at that third bullet there. In terms of total social impact of education, our experts have found that the net social value of a high school graduate is some $650,000 higher over his lifetime than that of a dropout. And the social value of a college graduate is $1.8 million more than a dropout. With approximately 8,350 dropouts per year in Connecticut, how can we afford to sit back and continue to underfund these schools? So, to conclude, we've got to fix the school funding system. It needs to be adequate and equitable and fully funded. That's the only way we're going to have equal educational opportunity. And to our state leaders, I say, stop fighting our children in their courtrooms, in your courtrooms, and instead put your money in their classrooms and help them be the stars we all want them to be, the stars we need them to be. In short, fund our future. How are we fixed for time? Jacob, where are you? We have 5 minutes. A quick question I would entertain. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I just have a question. What do you plan to do with the money if you end up winning the suit? Are you planning on distributing it back to the districts that ended up losing the money? Or are you putting it in grants?
Yes, this gentleman asked what we are planning to do with the money should we win the lawsuit. First of all, this coalition won't get the money. The money will be in the change of the school finance formula. Now, will there also be some catch-up funding for districts like Bridgeport and New Britain and all the priority school districts? I would certainly hope so. It's the only conscionable thing to do. But excuse me just a minute. But how all that plays out in terms of does it come with strings attached to the money? One would assume there will be some requirements on how money is spent because we all know that how money is spent matters a whole lot. But they already have these strings. They're used to that. That's not the critical issue here. And it would not be, at least in my hopes, it would not be prescriptive to say to community X, you now must offer year-round schooling. It may say to the highly distressed, academically distressed communities, you will offer year-round schooling. That's a different story. But that's way down the road. I wish it was something I stayed up nights worrying about right now. But we got to get there first. But I really like that question a whole lot. And when we get closer to it, there's going to be enormous amounts of community input into all that, I assure you. I think I need to go now so that our students... Oh, I'm sorry. One more question.
I know right now we're at the stage where the goal is to win the lawsuit, to get that writ that affirms that the state needs to provide adequate and equitable funding. However, after the last time I had the pleasure of listening to you, one of the things I looked into was the effect of adequacy and equity victories in other states. And in some of those states, many of them actually, state authorities continued to find ways to avoid doing what they were compelled to do by the judiciary. What challenges does CCJEF anticipate once it comes to that point, once that victory is attained, and it comes time for the state to make do what the towns deserve?
Thank you. The question was, what's to say if we win the case, I'm really paraphrasing here, that the legislature and governor will do what they need to do as a result of the victory. And I certainly can compare it with a couple of those states you're referring to, and I'll save them embarrassment of naming them right now. But I think for a future Connecticut News Junkie column, I really ought to light into them, don't you? I happen to live in one of those states, much to my embarrassment, New Hampshire. Oof. Anyway, I really believe in having been here now 14 years, I believe Connecticut is a very different kind of state. We have very smart people at the legislature, smart people in the governor's office, and whoever is in those positions are still a whole lot smarter than the states that I know of that have held out after the courts have repeatedly ruled, do it or else, do it or else. And I can tell you, one of those states, by the way, in New Jersey, we have a lot of good friends there. This case has gone on there, I think, nearly 40 years now under different names. But the plaintiff districts, the urban districts that brought that suit on behalf of their children have done extraordinarily well because all the remedies have come to them. The first thing the court did was mandate early childhood for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, full service, full day programs, wraparound services year-round. And now there is solid evidence that shows that enormous investment on the part of taxpayers in the state is paying off in increased achievement and so on. So I'm not worried about that all that much. We saw that with the Supreme Court decision, by the way. We got enormous praise from a whole lot of legislators that totally surprised me because they had argued the opposite side until that victory. And some of them stood by us at the press conference that day and made remarkable statements. This is not an obstinate government state, thank God. So with that, I just want to mention that at the end of the superintendent's panel, we hope to have 10 or 15 minutes where there will be an opportunity for any of you from the audience who feel so inclined to come forward and in 2 or 3 minutes, and please keep it brief, summarize the fiscal distresses that are going on in your own community. We'd be very happy to hear that. But if you would, when Dianne Orson, the panel moderator, when she calls that to happen, if you would just please line up along this aisle, that would be appreciated. But that way you'll come up and you'll be on the CTN cameras and your own communities will see that you have stood up for them. Thank you all very much.
Okay, good morning. I'm Dianne Orson. I'm a reporter and editor at WNPR, Connecticut Public Radio. I want to start off by saying thanks for a great program so far this morning. And thanks for inviting me to facilitate the next part of this program, which is a school funding equity forum, a panel discussion with 3 school superintendents in Connecticut, also Dianne DeVries, the project director for the Connecticut Coalition for Justice and Education Funding. Before we begin, let me remind you that at the end of this portion of the program, we're going to invite any of you who would like to participate by letting us know how school funding affects your school district to come up and let us know that. So be thinking as this next half hour or so is going along about how you'd like to join us. And what we'll do is ask you to line up here and then come up and speak at the podium. That'll be at the end of this portion. But let me introduce our panel. Our panel today includes Abby Dolliver, who's superintendent of the Norwich Public Schools. Thank you. Ron Jakubowski, acting superintendent of the Consolidated School District of New Britain. And John Ramos, who's superintendent of the Bridgeport Public Schools. We'll be talking about how Connecticut's current funding formula affects the academic achievement gap. And we're going to start right now with short statements by each of the superintendents who will come up to the podium, and then we'll begin. Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for asking me to be part of this forum. I always have something to say about Norwich Public Schools. I appreciate the organizers' attempts at putting this together in such an important topic. And seeing the students, of course, brings it all together because it always reminds us of why we're all here. I'd also like to thank 2 of our board members from Norwich for following me here today, and I always appreciate your support. We all do. I'll tell you a little bit about Norwich, what we're going through with our budget and our situation, but I look at that as not, oh no, this is what's terrible. I try to look at everything as a contributing factor to who we are, though it may be tough. And then I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on some of the proactive ways that we've tried to beat the odds in some of these more dramatic, difficult times. Norwich, and I have a few of the bullets up on the screen, but we're essentially in our 4th year of flat funding, meaning we go to the city and say we need this to not increase any programs or services, we need X amount of dollars. Just to meet the mandate of salaries, benefits, the usual ways in which your budget would grow without adding anything. And as I look back, I've been in this position for just about 2 years now. Over the last 4 years, we have received $12 million less than what we would need for flat funding without adding anything. That's pretty dramatic. We are relatively small compared to some of my colleagues over here, our district. However, we have all the needs of an urban district that we had before. The community has changed since the arrival of our 2 casinos. If you are aware, I'm sure you know where our casinos are. Well, Norwich is smack dab in the middle. So our community has changed. Just in this short amount of time from the start of school to right now, I did my statistics. We've had our free and reduced lunch percentage go from 70% of our students to 76% of our students meet the criteria for free and reduced lunch. We have about 30 languages spoken in our schools, and we are a partner district, meaning a priority district, one of the districts in need of improvement. So we have many of the mandates that we need to meet in order to improve academic achievement, which we're working very hard to do. Another interesting fact for Norwich is we do not have our own comprehensive high school. We're really a pre-K to 8 district with a small alternative high school. And we send our students primarily to the Norwich Free Academy, which is they call it a quasi-public private high school. They're run by their own board of trustees. We, Norwich taxpayers, and I'm one, pay tuition for our students to go there. And I don't mean this in a derogatory way because we work very well together, but we are at the effect of whatever their board and their school decides for their programming and their students and their tuition. We get the bill, we pay it, our students go there. It's a wonderful high school, but sometimes without any control, some of the challenges are great. Of course, over the last several years, we have eliminated, based on this $12 million loss in funding, many, many things. And I was listening to the students thinking, oh, those are all the things in what Dianne spoke of earlier that we've eliminated. Anything pretty much that's non-mandated. So in our middle schools, we no longer have any world language. We no longer have instrumental music. We no longer have after-school sports. well, I'll add to that, we do, but not through our general funding revenue that you would think. We have lost our library technical assistants. We have half-time in each school library media specialists who do all of, their teaching plus circulation. We have eliminated, as I say, anything that is non-mandated. When I started my position in January, almost 2 years ago, and the budget process began, it was pretty clear that we had to close schools in order to meet our budget. So here I am, a new person, saying, well, I guess we're going to close 2 schools, which we did. We thought about it, we really did research about it, but some in the community would say that it wasn't enough of a community forum, but we had to meet our budget. We felt that we could provide adequate education for our students in all of our other schools, and we are, and we have been, but it was a very, very difficult decision to close 2 schools at that time. They were very strong community-based schools. So we've had to make some dramatic cuts, other things which I won't even go into. Being the half-full person that I am, rather than the half-empty person, is what I try to be. We've really worked hard to work through some of these losses that we've had. We had a couple of parents come forward and start an educational foundation. I know many districts have them. And so we have a board of directors now and community members who have joined us for an educational foundation. And we've already been able to award some small grants to some of our teachers. So we're hoping to grow that. We've had a wonderful community concert through funding of an Adopt a Musician program that we started with our after-school funding, so that we could keep instrumental music alive in some fashion in our middle schools. So I would say about 50 middle school students are able to take advantage of after-school lessons, and they came together for a concert last weekend with other community groups. So we're working at trying to offer the opportunities that we had to eliminate. We do have, with the start of the governance councils, which is a mandate from the state based on being not making AYP, some of our schools had to have governance councils, and I decided to let everyone have a governance council. And it's elected parents, community members, and staff of each school. And ours are off and running. They're very interested. It's another way to get community and families involved in our schools. So I look at that as a positive, not just as another, oh no, here's another mandate. We're going to access these folks to help us be a voice in our community. The other great thing we did last year as a solution is called NEXT, N-E-X-T-T, Norwich Excellent Education for Today and Tomorrow's Schools. And I approached the city council from where we asked for funding, to do a project with our Regional Education Service Center, LEARN, to look at if we could have what we want, what would we have? And that's what our education system would look like in the future. And I'm not talking about just about like 2 schools and 4 middle schools. It's what would the community want if you could have what you want for education. And we had focus groups for about a 6-month period. I put together a team of people, 2 of whom are here from our board. It was community members, parents, and staff, and board members. And we met over time. Over 500 people came and took part in focus groups to find out what is it our community wants. We really lacked a community vision, a community voice for our education program. So we developed a document, a large document, which we live out of now, that helps in our decision-making in terms of what is it that the community wants, and it's clearly the things we talked about earlier. Linking parents, linking community leaders, linking businesses, giving students the opportunities to be out there in the community working with our businesses. So that is our guide right now. We're facing another difficult budget season, we know. 6 of our bargaining units are all in negotiations, which will have an impact, I'm sure, on where we go in the city. So time will tell, and I don't want to take too much more time, but that's part of our story. So thank you.
up there because we mirror that. My name is Ron Jakubowski. I'm the acting superintendent of New Britain Schools. I've been in education for 38 years, the last 20 in New Britain, the last 12 in the central administration as the assistant superintendent working with Doris Kurtz. And now on my own and anticipating the board coming up with somebody to replace me at some point. I'd like to welcome 4 board members that are here today, including Dr. Ayalon, who helped put this on today. Thank them for being here. Sharon Saavedra already spoke to you. One thing she didn't mention when she talked about the De Loretto students is that, you know, and that's our pride. I mean, that's what you saw here today is what our pride is. But the De Loretto students, unfortunately for these 8th graders, it won't happen, but next Wednesday, in fact, we are finally putting a shovel in the ground to complete an addition to their school so they will have an adequate facility to have a K-8 school with 900 kids, because the school has 900 kids right now. And that is thanks to Sharon Saavedra, our board president, working with Mayor Stewart and the Common Council, putting that together. And that is finally going to happen. Also have some principals of ours in the audience today. I'm happy that they are here. Our teacher union president is here. So a good representation from New Britain. I am not going to go through slides. In fact, I wanted to take a different tact on this. I had a few minutes to talk, and I want to talk about something more uplifting. We'll depress you at the end with it, but something more uplifting in the beginning. About 8 or 9 years ago, Dr. Kurtz and the administration saw that we were losing kids to Hartford magnet schools. We were losing, especially in the middle school area, we were losing kids, families actually moving out of town. We had some middle-class flight taking off on us. So we decided at that point to start a thing called Hal's Academy, House of Arts, Letters, and Science. Hal's Academy started, I think it's 10 years now. But the first class at Hal's Academy, we were going to have 25 kids in 6th grade. They were going to be our gifted kids in the 6th grade to try to hold those families in New Britain. 25 kids. 24 of them were white middle-class kids, 1 African-American, no Hispanics. That does not represent New Britain at all. So we saw that and we held to the line and said, well, should we let some kids in? Should we not? No, we're going to hold to the standard. There's a standard to get into this program and you need to meet the standard. But we're going to help feed that standard. And the way we help feed that standard and get kids into that program that really reflected New Britain was we started another program in kindergarten called Scholastic Academy. And Sarah Harris, as a principal of Vance, was one of the first teachers of that program. Well, we started Scholastic Academy in a couple of schools in our kindergartens. And what we did was Scholastic Academy had only a couple of screens. One of them, you had to be poor to be in this class. You had to be free and reduced lunch to be in this class. And then second, you had to show some precociousness as a 4-year-old. I mean, how much screening can you, but you had to show some precociousness, something that would indicate to us that you had some ability. And we put kids in this program, and we were only going to have it from kindergarten through 3rd grade. It was going to be a 3-year program, and then we said, okay, we'd get those kids right to a point, and they're in 3rd grade now. We'd send them off to the other schools, and hopefully they would help feed the gifted program in the elementary, 4th and 5th, and then feed Hal's Academy in 6th grade. That was the hope. Well, this program took off. And now we have 3 strands of it in 3 different schools, in Lincoln, Vance, and North End School. It is not K3, it is K5 program. And it has taken off where we have 1 strand in each, so that's 75 kids in each grade level all the way throughout. And I'm proud today to tell you that Hal's Academy now has 160 students from that 25 that it started. More than half, 60% of them, are minority students. 65% of them are free and reduced lunch students, and the standard hasn't changed one bit. Now, how did we get there? Well, this program, Scholastic Academy, I'm going to show you some stats on it. This is 3rd grade, and you know, it's not important to, the graph is what's important. And the graph is showing you, in the red is New Britain scores. This is grade 3, and as they go across, I believe it's math, reading, writing. New Britain scores in grade 3. Scholastic Academy scores are in the gold, and the state scores are in the blue. State scores. This is CMT. You can see in grade 3 that the Scholastic Academy students are at or above state in every one. This is grade 4, same profile in every area. And grade 5, even better. Last year's CMT scores. So, what does this prove? Poor and minority students can learn if given the opportunity. So what do we do differently with them? Scholastic Academy had a different treatment. First of all, the teachers were very carefully chosen and very carefully trained. And that is the key to any successful program, successful teachers. And they were very carefully trained in how we were going to work with these students. Second, class size was limited to 20 kids. Third, we put a computer program in called Breakthrough to Literacy that every child would have an opportunity to be on a computer for a certain period of time every single day. And fourth, we knew these kids were coming from poor homes, so we took them out of their environment and we mandated field trips for students. And these students go on a lot of field trips because we know that that is a way for our students to gain experiences in order to be better readers and more productive citizens. So we did all of those things with these students, and these are the results that we received. So what do we learn from this? Yeah, we have a small sample. It's 75 kids in each grade level. Actually, if you multiply that times 5, it's hundreds of kids that are achieving at this level. But why is that New Britain number still low? Well, the problem is this. We can't replicate this program. We know what works. We know how it works. We know it's expensive because putting those computers in each classroom, choosing the teachers, keeping the class size low, doing the field trips, all of those things are expensive. And we have never been able to replicate this because if we could, we'd do this in every school. In fact, the depressing part, we no longer have a class size of 20 in those classrooms. They're up to 25 like everybody else. Because what we've had to do through budget cuts of the last couple of years is we've had to try to equalize things. And when we cut teachers, we're trying to put more kids in these classrooms, and hopefully we don't see a depression of scores in the future. So my point here is, we'll talk numbers later and we can talk about things later of what's going on, but what happens in budget cuts is a whittling away effect of things that work. And that's what I'm afraid of is going to happen here. A whittling away of this successful program. And secondly, the opportunity, what funding would do, the money that Dianne talked about before, the $80 million that they owe us, what we would be able to do if we could keep class size under 20 and do the things that I talked about for Scholastic for all poor kids. Because, really, how do you screen a 4-year-old? They're all precocious. And if we were able to do that for every 4- and 5-year-old kid, we'd be able to see this throughout the district, not just in those 3 schools. So as we get further into this, we'll talk more in detail, but the big issues are class size, ELL students, and mobility. We'll talk more about that when the panel comes up. But thanks for the opportunity for allowing me to share something very positive in New Britain. Moving forward, hopefully it stays positive if we can keep the funding level we presently have. Thank you.
Good morning. Certainly good to see everyone. Bridgeport, 20,000, hold on a moment, please. Am I supposed to advance this myself? All right. 20,000 students in the city of Bridgeport, the public school system, 95% free and reduced lunch, 90% students of color. Many of you may be tracking what's going on in Bridgeport. Bridgeport has had a very interesting 6 months or so, on top of what has been a tumultuous time in Bridgeport over time. The budget situation there is such that we've been flat funded for 4 years in a row now. The federal dollars, of course, the ARA funds are gone. And so every year every year. Certainly since I've been there in June of '05, every year we've been cutting the budget, cutting services, cutting programs. That's just been the reality of it. And that's interesting if you consider the backdrop for all this. Basically what you have in front of you is a complicated, what appears to be a complicated slide, but actually what it speaks to is a pretty simple concept. I call it Rudy's paradigm because it comes from a colleague of mine, Dr. Rudy Crew, who was once chancellor in New York City and superintendent of the year a couple of years ago nationally. And basically what it depicts is that students are on the far end of the continuum, and what we typically have done in school districts is we've tried to force kids down a very narrow bandwidth. Very narrow bandwidth to have them go through this bandwidth and come out on the other end as graduates. And if, for whatever reason, dance to a different drummer or whatever the case might be, they fall off that bandwidth, then they drop out or they don't make it. Right? And our challenge has been, in public education, has been to try to expand the bandwidth. Make it broader. Expand the bandwidth, and through those bubbles represent areas like internships, increased use of the technology platform, and other kinds of notions that would allow students to engage the work differently and successfully. So in fact, that they come out on the other end, not just as graduates, but globally prepared. Right? So that's the context we're in while we're cutting budgets. Right? Well, let me say it a little differently. Basically, what you see here is the reality. The reality being that expectations are increasing exponentially. You know, incremental growth is not good enough. Right? I mean, if we trip along incrementally, it'll take a decade to begin to close this gap, this achievement gap. Right? Okay. So the growth has to be exponential. So the expectations are way up, which makes sense. But meanwhile, the revenue is down. And so what this does is it creates for us, in circumstances like Bridgeport, and I would dare say across the state, a very pressing question, which is how do we organize to deliver 21st century learning in a fiscally hemorrhaging environment? The model's broken. Every year we need more money, and we get less. That doesn't work. Expenses go up, expectations go up, money goes down. And so that's the challenge that we're facing. And so in Bridgeport, here's what happens. First of all, we come into our last budget cycle. And preparing for the budget we're currently in. And again, we're flat funded, but now our funds are gone. And so, at some point, in fact, specifically on June 16th, I recommended to the Board of Education that we not pass the budget because of the consequences that it had for children. That we not pass the budget, but instead inform the state that we cannot adequately educate our children with the money we have. That's what I call the day that the line was drawn in the sand. The board approved that recommendation almost unanimously and set off a series of events that led to two important foundation points, I guess you might say. One is that the board itself voted to set itself aside and ask the state board to invoke a new accountability law and have the commissioner appoint a new Board of Education. The other occurrence that is noteworthy is that now there are fundamental discussions happening at the state level, as well as in City Hall, about how to fix this budget problem. This is a crisis. You heard Dianne earlier, Dr. DeVries earlier, say that Bridgeport wins the prize when it comes to cost adequacy and the largest gap. It's $132 million we're supposed to be spending, more a year, based on that cost adequacy study. So we win the prize. The situation is dire. And even without having settled the budget, as I stand here on December 9th, the 2011-12 budget has not been settled. But even still, all of these cuts have already been made. They've already been made. Now, if the budget is not settled, the other slide's not there. Well, let me just tell you then. If the budget's not settled, we will be reducing 5 more administrators. We will be eliminating 23 guidance counselors. It's not listed here. We will be eliminating 10 social workers, psychologists. We will be creating 21 consolidated classrooms where 5th and 6th grade students will be studying together. Class size is already 29. Okay. But those are the realities that we're headed towards. Okay. But I would dare say that all of us in the state are on this continuum. You know, we just happen to be the poster child for it. Right? But, you know, certainly the Norwich story is not too far afield. Right? New Britain. And I would, again, even in backing up, and you heard Dr. DeVries say earlier that even more affluent communities are talking about that list of priorities as being priorities for them as well. So we're all on this continuum at one point or another. Something needs to give. Something needs to give. So there is the funding, yes. Money matters. You heard the example given by New Britain, so I won't cite ours. We have disruptive innovations that we're engaged in, and I can point to models that certainly suggest that if you have the money and you can engage in the appropriate professional development for teachers, if you can provide the resources, et cetera, that you can make magic in these classrooms, and students like those you saw performing today, who have the wherewithal, who have the propensity, can certainly achieve great things. But money matters. And so that is true. At the same time, I think it's incumbent upon us in public education to talk more about how we change the model. Because, as I said earlier, the model is unsustainable. And so that's where ideas such as the CAPS transformation plan, ideas such as the work that the Regional Educational Laboratory for the Northeast is engaged in with some of our districts. That's where that work comes in, as we think more broadly about how we move this model forward and how we create a model going forward that will answer the challenge of the 21st century. Let's face it, in many respects, we have to do a GM. But it's not as easy as eliminating Saab and creating an electric Chevy. Okay? But somehow we've got to figure it out. And that's our challenge. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to begin with some questions. And again, a reminder that you'll be invited to join us at the end and, with your thoughts or questions that you'd like to add. I actually want to begin where you just left off and just say, let's say we were to start from scratch, sort of throw out the ECS formula out, wipe the slate. What's a better way to do this?
From a funding perspective?
Yes.
Perhaps one of my other colleagues will be able to speak to that. For myself, my focus has always been on trying to figure out how to get more resources into the system to make it happen. I'm not a politician, although people suggest that superintendents are. I've always sort of eschewed that description. My job is to make it happen. I'm leaving the rest of it to those folks at the State House and otherwise. All I know is that adults have got to figure this out. And adults have to stop pointing at each other. That's why I think the state intervention in Bridgeport is so important, because it extends the responsibility beyond the city, not to let the city off the hook by any means, but extends the responsibility beyond the city to include the state in a more direct way. Because all the adults have to get in a room and figure this out. Kids are dying.
It's too close.
Do you want to say anything?
Sure. I guess we could start with laws that are passed in both the federal and at the state level that no funds follow. And the poster child for that is the special education law. That was passed in the 70s, and with a promise of a 50%, a 50-50 share of the federal government was going to pay their 50% and the state would pay their 50%. I can tell you right now that the special education money we get from the federal government is 8% of what we're paying. And we have a $118 million budget, and $30 million goes to special ed. And as Dianne talked before, this is not about kids not deserving it or not needing it. It's not about that. It's a civil right. And then what ends up happening is, because it is mandated and you have to pay for it somehow, then other portions of the schooling get cheated. And so that's where I would start with. If you're going to mandate something, fund it.
We're hearing that the next legislative session will focus quite a bit on education. What's one thing you would like to see come out of the next legislative session?
All right. Well, again, it has to do with our fiscal environment. I think the general understanding and respect for education and what it means to our future is lacking at a lot of levels. Not that people don't care, but in some levels, they don't understand how important it is. Certainly, we have to come up with a new formula. That has to be. We all have to get together in a room and say, you can't put it all on the backs of our cities. It can't be all on the backs of our state. If the money's not there, the money's not there. But then how do we divide what we have equally enough to meet the needs of all students?
Certainly what you just, I'm not quite sure where to put this. Certainly what you just witnessed in terms of the numbers. If in fact nothing happens in this legislative session to change that or that arrangement, next year's worse. Mm-hmm. Next year's worse. So we need to get something needs to come out of this session that begins to create some equal footing.
Well, can we talk a little more specifically? How do we more fairly distribute the money there is? If there's no hidden pots of money up in Hartford that are going to just appear at the end of the rainbow, how do we more fairly distribute the money that's there? Dianne DeVries.
I'll tell you, if there is no more money in Hartford, I don't want any tinkering more done with this formula. It's bad, it's flawed, it's unfair, it's probably unconstitutional. But every tinkering makes it even worse. Just like a couple of years ago under the Rel Commission, when they did tinker with the formula, they actually made it less equitable than it was already. Hard to believe, but you can make a bad thing worse. So the number one thing I want out of this session is, if you don't have money, don't tinker. If you have just a little money and want to tinker, then work on the special education excess cost grant. The lack of reimbursement for the highest cost needy children And we're talking about many children are incurring costs of $250,000 for their services. Those reimbursement levels have gotten less and less and less across all communities of this state. What happens is the cost of special ed services keeps going up, and as we have increasing incidences of these very needy children, and you put in for your reimbursement after meeting the 4.5 times the cost of a normal child, then any amount above that you can submit for reimbursement to the state. But guess what? That pot for reimbursement is a finite amount of money that has been cut year after year and frozen and so on and so on. And as more communities put in for that reimbursement and the costs increase and it stays frozen, then you're getting back less and less and less of that reimbursement. Those costs cannot be contained given the needs, the legitimate needs of children. So that would be the first thing that could help every community without exception. And thirdly, I really want to caution against hasty tinkerings of the current formula. This is not something that should be done by a lay panel. This is something that must necessarily involve school finance experts. And I would certainly hope that when the fixing comes to be done, it is consistent with the CCJEF lawsuit. Otherwise, it will merely exacerbate the lawsuit, if you get my gist.
I have a comment, not about that, but is that us or is that you guys up there? About what I'd like to see coming out of this, out of the state, out of this legislation. And there's already the new commissioner has been out to talk to us and is on a listening tour to try to find out what it is, what really is happening and what our real needs are. And that's what I'd like. I would like an understanding of the entire state legislature as to what we're talking about here. Not only an understanding and appreciation of it. We shouldn't be living, and you know, it's embarrassing to be living in a state or in a city where what's accepted in one community would never be accepted in another. And the example that I use often is that Pulaski Middle School is located close to the Farmington line. In fact, it's 2 miles away from Irving Robbins Middle School in Farmington. And Pulaski Middle School has a average class size of 29 kids in every classroom. We have one guidance counselor for 700 kids. We have one social worker. We have an antiquated computer lab. Drive 2 miles to Irving Robbins and tell me if you're in the same state. And I think that's what I'm looking for this state to do, is to recognize that and do something about it.
I think one of the other important issues would be all of the mandates that come down that are unfunded or underfunded, not special education, it's underfunded, it's necessary. Over a quarter of our budget is for special education students, used for special education students, and rightly so. However, I think that our legislators need to work closer with us and the communities to really understand what the needs are and what they're asking us to do. For example, with high school reform, all these new changes and programs and things that we have to add to our, and not saying that that they're not worthwhile, but we don't have the resources to implement some of these mandates. And until we do, we should not have additional mandates.
In the past few weeks, we've heard about kind of rethinking of state education funding that would include a mix of money that districts can count on, along with money tied to performance, sort of like incentive program, and then money that's conditional on needs, for a certain district. I'm curious about your thoughts about that.
And if that has to do with the waiver, if we don't have to make AYP, it doesn't mean that you don't still have requirements. From what I've been learning, the requirements may be even greater if we go for a waiver in some way. So how we determine where the funding goes, and it still has to be based on some type of need, and just saying that you don't have to meet criteria or that you have to meet criteria to get funding is not fair. Norwich was a priority school district years ago, and they improved their performance. We did. And then we get taken off the list, they take the funding away, and here we go back. And it's not just about funding, but now we're back trying to fight our way back up to have improved student achievement. So it's okay. Okay.
So I wonder, Ron Jakubowski, you and I spoke on the phone before this, and you were talking about 3 things that are the most important in your school district: class size, the large number of mobile students, kids who are shifting back and forth. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about those 3 important sort of takeaways that we can take. You know, your head starts to spin a little bit with all this, and that I think helps put a point on things.
Well, I mean, we've talked about this a bit here today, but the 3 things that when I think about lack of funding and how it affects us, the 3 main things are class size, student mobility, and ELL students. And, you know, just to get back to your other question, there's not a level playing field. So you can't be competing with someone when the playing field is not level. Let me just give you an example. I said Pulaski Middle School has 29 kids in each class. Every kindergarten in New Britain has 25 kids or more, every one of them. So that's a class size issue, with no paraprofessionals. We have kids coming out of preschools that have, the preschool has 16, 18 kids with a teacher and 3 paras. So there's 4 adults in a room with 18 kids, and all of a sudden they're in a kindergarten with 25 and a teacher. So, you know, to expect the teachers to be able to do what they need to do is almost impossible. And I can talk about class size numbers all over, but you know, John alluded to it. They're out of control. So we have more kids in our classes. Second is a mobility issue. We have a school, and actually we've mitigated this. We've done a better job with it. But there is one school in our district, North End School, that has a return rate of students of 80%, which means that 20% don't come back every year. They go somewhere else. They move somewhere. Well, the state average is 92. Now, if the state average, and that bumps up against our averages, that means the state average, if you look at some of the other more affluent districts where you buy a house and never move, I'll bet they're 98, 99%. What it means for North End, if there's 300 kids at North End School, which there are, 60 kids don't come back every year. So within 5 years, nobody came back that started 5 years ago. And in fact, last year at North End's graduation ceremony from 5th grade, there was only 1 kid in that 5th grade that started there in kindergarten. That's an issue. And it's an issue that is in urban schools, more prevalent than it would be in more affluent schools. It's an issue that needs to be looked at, that people don't look at. And it's right here on your strategic school profile, so it's listed there. And the third is the ELL students, the students that come with different languages. You have 30 languages in your schools. I'm sure you have upwards of 30 also. We have 35 different languages being spoken when kids go home. Our more recent arrivals, I mean, Spanish, Polish, we know that, Laotian, Bosnian, and we can name all of the ones that everyone knows about. But our more recent arrivals are from Yemen. They speak Arabic. They're poor. Their moms don't speak English at all. Their dads do. There's not a lot of reading going on in the home. There's not a lot of help with homework. So you put kids into a situation like that, and one of our schools is kind of overwhelmed with it. One of our schools, Jefferson School, a third of the school are students from Yemen. Half of the kindergarten and 1st grade are kids from Yemen. We can't find an Arabic teacher. We have Arabic tutors in the schools helping out with these students. They're doing okay because but they need more attention and more time. And if you have those students in rooms with 27 and 28 kids, they lose out. So those are 3 things that I look at when we talk about the effect of a lack of funding and what it means in the classroom: class size, ELL students, and the kids constantly moving in and out.
I'd just like to add that from my perspective, I've been in this arena for some time now. I can't believe I'm one of the elderly folks involved in this stuff at this point in my career. Time goes fast. From my perspective, this really comes down to whether or not the people in this state have the will to do the right thing for children of color and children in poverty. Does the will exist, both personal and institutional will, to impact black, brown, and children of color and children in poverty? That's the question. Because if the will is there, we'll figure it out. I remember doing an achievement gap study for Norwich in '99, and in that time frame, had an opportunity to go to South Africa in an unrelated activity. And what I saw there that stood out for me in South Africa is they worked to eliminate what had been 5 departments of education and create one. It had been 5 during apartheid. Now create one. And what struck me about it was the drive that they had, the will that they had, the belief that they had. And I came back home and got immersed back into my study and could not help but realize, could not help but acknowledge the lack of will. You know, when the General Assembly gets together this year, if those communities that don't have some of the vestiges of poverty, if they don't make up their minds that they're going to help do something about this, then nothing's going to happen because they have the votes. The city block doesn't have enough votes. This has got to come down to a personal conviction about what's right.
Thank you. We have about 10 minutes. Is there anybody who'd like to come up and talk about the impact of school funding or lack of that on their school district? Please. Come on up. You can speak at the podium.
How's everybody doing today? My name's Jordan Jocko. I'm a resident of New Britain. I also work for the FES office in New Britain as a family education specialist. I just have one quick question. I mean, I've been through the New Britain school system. I started there. I went all the way up through high school, graduated, and went on to college. And I noticed like budget cuts and everything, even at the high school level, because I tried and volunteer as an assistant coach for the wrestling team there, because they couldn't really afford one. Now, I have a quick question, though. Does anybody have any plans to help sustain the budget in case, like, the federal, like, to help with the federal funding? Like, if the federal government doesn't want to give, or the state government doesn't want to give us the money to help what we need, did anybody think of any other ways to possibly bring some more money in? Like, maybe have outside companies sponsor computer labs? 'Cause I know for a fact that Stanley Works just posted up a 12% increase in sales, which for them, that increases billions of dollars. Has anybody thought about going to maybe them and asking them, would you like to donate a computer lab or something like that, or outside companies to help fund what we're missing so much from the state government? And since the state government is in a deficit, and the federal government is in a deficit, and the cities are in a deficit, did anybody think that maybe, you know, possibly going out would actually help us fix it, since nobody seems to have money right now?
Part of what we do is look for any grant possible and apply, but it's getting much more competitive. We're all trying to get the same pot. But, and to look at companies, for example, Pfizer, which is in our neighborhood, not in our city, helped fund a redesign of our middle school. So they sponsored, they gave money toward our science classrooms. So it is companies, longstanding companies like that, that we need to look toward. But everybody's looking toward them.
And you know, in New Britain, the hospitals have both stepped forward to help fund our health academy, for example. But my experience with funders like that, like with Stanley or whatever, they will fund a project, they will fund a computer lab or something like that. They're not funding people, and that's what we're lacking. We're lacking people. We're lacking teachers and paraprofessionals and others that we need in our schools, and those funders won't fund that because, quite frankly, that's the job of the state and federal government to do.
Right, and the other elephant in the room is that a lot of private money is now being dedicated towards charter schools, programs like Teach for America, New Leaders for New Schools, and I am not opposed to those things by any means, but I think that we have to focus on the schools as we know them and work on the fundamental public school system that is a basic civil right for all children. I think the focus needs to be there. Fortunately or unfortunately, as the case may be, I see a lot of private dollars kind of going towards a more or less a parallel system. And again, there's a place for the charters, for example. There's a place for them. But the charters will let's not get lost in that discussion, because they're only going to serve a small percentage of the kids. At the end of the day, the bulk of the students will remain in the public schools. We have to figure out how to fund them.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I just wanted to ask.
That's
See
good.
if there was any other plans.
He's from my board, this guy.
Good morning. I'm Aaron Daniels. I'm from the Norwich Board of Education, and the point that I would like to bring with this time in history is doing for us. I would hope that it is, when something goes on in your life and takes you to that lowest level, it's your opportunity to spring up and to change the way you think and do things. Some may find this as sacrilegious as a 21-year retired Navy man, but the money's out there. I just came from the CAPE convention a couple of weeks ago, and one of our speakers told us of how the budget for the Department of Defense so many years ago was 2.5 times our next closest enemies, I believe was the word he used, combined budgets were, and how that budget is now over 3 times, 8 times that amount now. He told of a statistic that some of the smaller reasons that we have people incarcerated right here in the state of Connecticut also would do a great deal to bring down this deficit, the monies that we say that we're looking for. So what I would hope to provide or to remind people that this is our opportunity to check. We don't have to keep doing things the way we've been doing them in the past. We in Norwich with our next program, and as the gentleman said, we're going out, we're looking, we're finding new partners, because the old model is broken. The way we've been trying to do things, taking it from our citizenry to make things different is not the way it's going to work. So we have to come up with some new ideas, both in the teaching and particularly today what we're talking about in the funding. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more, yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Robin Pachala, and I'm the chair of the Schools Committee for Connecticut Parent Power, and we're very proud to be one of the collaborators of this event. I first of all want to thank the panelists and everyone for coming. It's been very informative and very inspiring for me. I have to say, I have grandchildren. 2 grandchildren are in the Scholastic Academy, so I know whereof Ron speaks. We're very proud of them. They're doing a great job. They did good in the CMTs, and so some of those statistics reflect part of my family. But I come here today more as an organizer. I think what John Ramos's words very much inspired me, that it's going to have to be personal will that is going to move this. And we should start it here today. We're here. We were motivated and taught about this important issue, and we're here because we love these children. We love the kids in the state of Connecticut, and we understand the terrible burden that the schools are under. let's, as parents and organizers and people that care, let's give our legislators the personal will to move. Let's not give them any rest. Let's call them, write them, show up for testimony. Let's be present in a way that we never have been before. I think we can write letters to the editor. We've all gotten pretty good education, correct? We all have good writing skills. Maybe we're developing our speaking skills, but I'm saying as an organizer, that's what I want to take away today. I want to go back to what responsibilities I have and opportunities I have with Connecticut Parent Power, and I want to put in motion things with my parents and my committee so that things will never be the same. And I hope in your heart that you can take this now and run with it so that things will not be the same in your community. We must make them listen. If the money is there, then they must redistribute it in a better way. And the achievement gap must not be tolerated. There are many things we can put our teeth into. Find your niche. Speak your voice. These 8th grade students did it today. Surely we as adults can find a way to find the courage to do this. So I challenge you, and I hope you'll accept my challenge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, and I'm Lydia Tadone. I'm chair of Simsbury Board of Education. I also sit on CREC Council, and I am president of Connecticut Association of Boards of Ed. And I would like to thank Dr. DeVries for her great PowerPoint, and also the panel of superintendents for their very intriguing issues that are going on in their districts. I think I would like to just comment, since I do represent an affluent district, and you are urban superintendents, and I am a Board of Education member, and I see other fellow colleagues in the audience. And what would you have for advice for those of us that are not in urban districts, but are also within the boundaries of urban districts? I am 10 miles from Hartford. We are also a chef district, and we also are an open choice district. And as Dr. Ramos had mentioned before about it has to be the will of the people, what would be your advice for us that do not have the challenges that you have in urban, but in other high-performing districts, to tell us to bring to legislators as challenges of public education, whether it be rural, urban, affluent, in a whole?
So since they're your neighbor, you may want to go first.
Sure. Well, I think what you want to bring there is the reality that 50% of the workforce in Connecticut will come from urban areas within the next 10 years. And if they're not prepared, then where does that leave the state of Connecticut? Because we have to put it where the kids are right now. And if we don't, they're not going to go to college, they're not going to be productive citizens, and they won't be able to take the jobs that are out there. And that's where, and we at the CABE convention, they talked about some statistics regarding that. And I don't know if you were there, you saw that. And that's why it's not just an urban-suburban problem. It's a Connecticut problem. And the sooner that people realize that it is all of our problem. It's not just Hartford's problem, and it's not just Hartford's problem. See, that's part of the problem with the state, too. It's always just been Hartford's problem, not Bridgeport, New Britain, and the rest of us. But that if we want an educated workforce that's going to take care of the state in the future, we need to put some investment in it.
Yeah, I would say that there's the moral imperative, there is the economic imperative, and what I would urge you to do is to lobby your local representatives, particularly the state representatives and senators, to put a stake in the ground around these issues. I realize that at some point people have to see what's in it for them. I get that, but at the same time there is this sort of this larger purpose that we that we walk around this earth to fulfill, right? And somehow if we can get folks to, if we can appeal to that side of folks to take a stand.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. And I will agree with you on my last thought. It's about educating all children in the state of Connecticut, regardless of where they live, of which district, each child. And as you've mentioned before, I can't remember which one of you mentioned, it's the children that are at stake here. At the end of the day, at the end of the year, it's the children that are at stake from pre-K actually right up until graduating from college. So thank you very much for all of you for your very informative discussion.
Come on up. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jessica Owen. I was in the presentations with the 8th graders, and to give you a visual, the masks that we were wearing today, because New Britain doesn't have the budget for art, one of my classmates spent her money for the paint to make these masks. And we paid for it's plaster. We paid for the plaster for the students to have to make the masks. If we didn't spend that money, we wouldn't have been able to even do this presentation that you all enjoyed today. And a lot of their poems, a lot of their feelings, their thoughts came through the mask. When we sat with them and had them talk, they stared at their masks and talked to the mask. So without this physical object, they wouldn't have been able to come out as much as they did, and I can fully vouch for that for being with them for 5 to 6 weeks. So when college students have to spend our money, we spend it very sparingly. And when my friend Danielle, who was in my class, when she came right up, she said, I will buy this paint for these students. I want them to have this experience. It's really mind-blowing that she's like, you know what? I have to pay for my food, I have to pay for my rent, and I'm not doing a very good job because I'm in college, and I will sacrifice and pay for paint for these students. Why can we go without food because we're college students and have kids paint their masks because we know what it's like, but adults, including administrators, all the upper-ups people, why can't they realize that art, science, music, dance is important to these students' lives? That's all I have to say. Thank you.
I feel the need to say something, though. I just want to clarify. I mean, first of all, those things are very important to us. We have cut no music or art program teachers. We've kept that. But I can tell you that we had a budget of $1 million for instructional supplies, which includes paper, pencils, and all the other things kids need to do. We cut that by 70%, which means we cut $700,000 out of instructional supplies last year in order to put 20 teachers in classrooms. So it was a choice between having paper or a teacher. We chose the teacher, but that's where we are.
Right. Likewise.
Amen.
It's the same story.
Good afternoon. My name is Coralie Bower, and I'm from Norwich. I'm a member of the Norwich Board of Education, and I must admit that I'm very, very nervous. This is a very, very emotional conversation because we are talking about people, children that have been entrusted to us to give them the best education possible and to make them a better citizen. I'd like to thank the gentleman who talked about the willingness. We must have a will in order to have the willingness to work, to teach, and to learn, to be with children and people. I know it's about money, but for me, it's about the gap in communication and the disconnection of people. I grew up in Norwich, and I love Norwich. I left Norwich, and I lived in New York for 37 years. I returned and became active in the community. There are times I am a little uncomfortable, but it is my determination to continue to move forward and to do the best I can, because we are suffering. When I say we, people, period, are suffering, but minorities are suffering more. Because when you can determine the number of prisons by the 3rd or the 4th grade, that is really sad. And a lot of the money that belongs in the districts are going to the prisons. And what are we doing now to keep kids in school? One boy said, okay, he dropped out of school when he was in the 9th grade, but actually he dropped out in the 3rd or the 4th grade. So it's about motivation, it's about moving forward. And yes, the money is not there. And you know what? You can cry all day. It's not gonna be there. So what we have to do, become more creative. And I must say, Norwich is doing a lot of great things. We do collaboration and partnerships. We recently established a foundation, and it's really, really doing great. And it's all through people, not money. People are working together as a team. And this is the only way that it's going to take place, when you begin to respect another person because they are a human being. And the bottom line, I always say this, I've never seen a twin casket, and I've never seen a casket with a pocket full of money. So whatever we have to give it back, and it will be returned in many folds. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sarah Harris. I'm a very proud principal in New Britain. I was a former teacher, scholastic teacher. I think one thing that we constantly are doing in our school and our district is we have to constantly do more with less. And we want to make sure that our kids have the opportunities that all the kids have, whether similar to the districts that surround us. And I think a challenging thing is that, for instance, in our school, we have 3 smart boards. And a school down the road in Farmington, they have a smart board in every classroom. So we talk about opportunities, we talk about preparing our students to be college and career ready. We want to make sure that we have the tools and the resources to provide those opportunities for our students. Because the best part is when you have students who are excited about their learning and also have the same opportunities of someone 2 miles down the road in a more affluent situation, but as well as to build their background so that they are prepared and that they will stay in school and they will stay focused and graduate from college. That's really what we're working hard to do. I will tell you that I'm very, very proud of the amount of staff I have in our building, that we're constantly trying to help out needy families. We are looking for grants. My PE teacher just got 50 brand new pairs of sneakers. My music teacher is writing to get more musical instruments, because these are the ways we want to tap into our students and keep them excited about coming to school every day. We received $10,000 for technology from a foundation in California. We were ecstatic for more technology for our kids. Obviously the challenge will be how will we maintain it, because it was obviously a grant. So we are constantly beyond our school hours, meeting together in teams, looking to see what else can we do for our kids. We just want them to have the same opportunities and equal opportunities as everyone else. And for them to be prepared, so that, because they are our future and we have to take care of them, we also have to lay the foundation for them. Thank you.
I'm Aram Ayalon I wear 2 hats. I'm on the school board in New Britain, but also a professor here in teacher education. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the emotional impact this budget issue has, both actually at the board level and also at Central. I think at the board level, this is my second term now, just got reelected. And every year for the past 4 years, going through the turmoil, going through the process in January all the way to June, it's really emotionally taxing on all of us at the school board level, at the administration level, at the teachers, and the impact on morale is horrible. And it also, the impact of the budget cuts also on our students at the college level, the future teachers. There's about four of my students here who were involved throughout the semester in writing a paper and thinking of budget. Where are their jobs? We had a teacher education here in Central to put our early childhood on hold. There are no students enrolled in early childhood because there's very little pay. And our graduate program, a lot of our secondary and elementary teachers who come and take their master's here and no longer are enrolled in our program, they're enrolled in special ed. They're enrolled in reading in areas where they are more likely to be in special ed because they can be employable. If they lose their job, they can find a job more likely in special education. So it has all of this process has been an emotional roller coaster for all of us, for board members, for superintendents, and I think it's time that the legislator, the governor, and all the policymaker understand that it's not just money; it's the emotional taxes that it has on all of us and the demoralization that it has on all of us, educators and kids. And it's time to change this course. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you all. I think we're going to be wrapping up. I just wanted to turn to Dianne DeVries one last time before we end. Dianne, you were talking about ways that people wanted to find the slide presentation that you gave.
Yes, I neglected to say that the PowerPoint presentation, I don't know if this is on, the PowerPoint presentation is available on the CCJEF website. That address is www.ccjef.org. If you have any questions, you'll see at the end of that PowerPoint my email address. It's simple. It's Dianne with 2 N's, unlike Dianne Orson. 2 N's at ccjef.org. And I've listed my phone numbers. Don't hesitate to pick up the phone or to send me an email. Email is probably easier than the phone. Thank you very much.
I want to thank the superintendents and everybody for presenting a really terrific morning. Thanks a lot. Thanks for coming.
Good luck.
Thank you so much. You as well.
Thank you.